beautiful, and every night has its day so magical. And if there's love in this life, there's no obstacle that can't be defeated. For every tyrant a tear for the vulnerable, in every loss all the bones of a miracle. For every dreamer a dream we're unstoppable, with something to believe in. Monday left me broken, Tuesday I was through with hoping, Wednesday my empty arms were open, Thursday waiting for love, waiting for love. Thank the stars it's Friday, I'm burning like a fire.
Politics isn't about leaving it to somebody else, it's about doing it ourselves.
Sunday, I'll be waiting for love, waiting for love to come around.
You've awakened something here. What I'm curious to know is, respectively, whether you win or lose, what happens to this, all this momentum and energy which is congregating around your company?
It carries on. It carries on. Demanding social justice, it carries on. Opposing the austerity agenda, it carries on. Looking for peace.
This is only just the start.
Whatever happens, things have changed.
You're going to win, aren't you?
I'm making no predictions. We will see what happens.
Jeremy Corbyn, 251,000.
We are one of a kind, irreplaceable. How did I get so blind and so cynical? If there's love in this life, we're unstoppable. No, we can't be defeated. Monday left me broken, Tuesday I was through with hoping, Wednesday my empty arms were open, Thursday waiting for love, waiting for love. Thank the stars it's Friday, I'm burning like a fire gone wild on Saturday. Guess I won't be coming to church on Sunday. I'll be waiting for love, waiting for love to come around.
Well, that was incredible. I think when we talk about harnessing new energy, this is what we're trying to do, and that was absolutely brilliant, Umar. Okay, as Peter said, we're live streaming across the web, so I just want to say hello to Bernie Sanders in Vermont. When people are playing to packed-out houses in America talking about socialism, you know that the change is happening. So, you know, we know that Trump is the enemy and what will be, but I, for one, wishing Bernie all the best. We've got the media here. We've got one or two. We've got Notts TV, which I really welcome, independent media. But the mainstream media chose to ignore today. Now, I think it might have been my press release that said 500 people coming along to discuss socialist policies and campaigns that maybe didn't attract them. My other press release that I didn't send was 500 rabid left-wingers plot to deselect right-wing Labour MPs. I think we'd have had them all around the room. We are in a situation where last year two momentous things happened. On May the 7th, Labour lost the general election, and we are going to live with the consequences of that for the next 5 years, and it is grim, and we should never forget that it's grim, and we should never forget what the Tories are going to do to us. And today, we're going to be looking at how we can stop things like that happening again in the future. But on September the 12th was a special day, the election of Jeremy Corbyn, with a great mandate, and it's given hope and inspiration to many. I was lucky enough this morning to speak to Jeremy, who sends his best wishes and solidarity to this event today, because he knows that without people giving the momentum behind him, he's going to be isolated in that leadership position. So I think we are all sending today our best wishes back to him. Now, the membership of the Labour Party is at its highest for many years, and I urge anybody here today who's not a full member to join the party and to take up the struggle. It's nice when people from outside the party want to support Jeremy, but the real debate and the real politics that needs to support Jeremy is happening inside the party, and that's where we need to be, and I urge people to get involved. Now, Momentum grew out of that successful campaign, and we're very much a new organisation. In fact, this is the first regional conference of Momentum anywhere in the country. Local groups have been formed. I think there's over 120 local groups across the country. We have some of them in the East Midlands, including in Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire and Northamptonshire. We've got a regional structure being formed and a national committee, interim one, elected. And today, we're electing our two East Midlands people onto that national committee. We're running that election. Louise is somewhere. Stand up, Louise. If you haven't registered to vote, please see Louise before the end of lunchtime and cast your vote for that election. Now, today is about debate, discussion and ideas, and hopefully a lot of campaigning activities that we can take away. Lunchtime is the brief sub-regional meetings to try and network people together. And the final session we'll hear back from the workshops and see what campaigns that we can run together over the next period. So hopefully from today you'll get involved both in your local Momentum group but also in your local Labour Party too. OK, our first three speakers this morning are all running workshops later on, in fact in the morning session. So they will speak briefly this morning and then will be followed by John and the opportunity for some Q&A. Now, we were trying desperately to get a junior doctor to come with us and speak this morning, but as it's a Saturday, they're working. We need to give our solidarity to those junior doctors. We need to be on the picket lines with them. We need to be demonstrating with them, and we need to be getting behind them, because their fight is our fight, but not only their fight, but the nurses, the auxiliaries and everybody else who works in the health service deserves our full support. Okay, our opening speaker is Dr. Francis Ryan. Francis is a campaigning journalist and writes for the Guardian's austerity column, Hard Work in Britain. Welcome, Francis.
Thank you, Steve. Is that mic all right? Yeah. I think you need me too loud. Is that all right? Is everyone here okay? Yeah, great. All right. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you so much for having me here today. It always amazes me to see so many people come to these sort of events, particularly on a Saturday morning. I can't imagine it's just because you've got nothing else better to do or you just love going out of bed at the weekend. I think it's probably something else. I think there is this feeling at the moment of wanting to do something and the feeling that it is actually possible to do something. I think when you look at where this government is taking this country, sitting by and watching doesn't feel like much of an option. In this country, it is incredibly bleak, but 100,000 disabled people right now are living without the help to get out of bed, cook meals, or go to the toilet. And the Tory response is to cut £4 billion from the social care system. Private companies are still being paid millions to carry out defunct fit-for-work tests, as MPs vote this week to take £30 a week sickness benefit from cancer patients and paraplegics. They built this thing called the benefit sanction system, which means, as I'm sure you all know, that if you're 5 minutes late to the job centre, they can take the money you need to live on. The DWP, that department meant to help people build their lives, is being forced to admit how many people going through the benefit system have died. Rough sleeping on only one night in England has now doubled as youth shelters close, and this week it's been left to Biffa, a waste management company, to warn that staff are finding homeless people sleeping in recycling bins. Doctors are reporting cases of malnutrition and rickets as midwives send pregnant women to food banks and teachers report buying their pupils haircuts and underwear. You'd be forgiven for thinking that we were talking about some far-fetched dystopian parody rather than actually what is happening right now in one of the richest nations on earth. Locally in Nottingham last month, I spoke to a woman called Louise Cook, and Louise is just one of those people who each Friday, just a few miles from where we are today, runs what you would essentially call a clothes bank. I'm sure we're all familiar with what a food bank is. They're pretty normalised in this country now. Just like a food bank, people come to Louise with a voucher referred by a state agency. But instead of needing something to eat, they come for bedding or a winter coat or grey or white bits of clothes they can pass off as school uniforms for their kids. And Louise told me about parents that call her saying, we can't afford to buy our children clothes, we need to come in to the clothes bank, but we can't come in on a Friday because we're at work. I think that sort of highlights the system that we're currently in. As we say goodbye, Louise told me that last year they sent spare clothes to disaster zones in Nepal and the migrants in Calais, but that this year it looks like every donation will be needed in Nottingham. You hear that, and I think you think about the Conservatives going into the last election boasting that they've saved Britain and our economy from disaster, and you wonder what exactly they think disaster looks like. 2.5 million working families are currently struggling to make ends meet. Just this week it was predicted that new benefit cuts means that over the next decade another 1 million children will be pushed into poverty. The stats last year showed 300,000 disabled people have been pushed below the breadline by Tory policies. Labour is here to say, hopefully, that contrary to Tory spin, that is not actually as good as it gets, that a strong economy can't actually exist whilst over 1 million people are queuing for food parcels. If you have a decent job and work all day, it is a scandal that you can't afford to pay the bills, let alone hope to send your kids to uni or put some money away for a rainy day or a holiday. If you fall ill and you ask the government for help, you deserve dignity and a decent income, and not to worry about where your next meal's coming from as politicians go on TV and call you lazy or a scrounger. I think the reality is that you knock on doors, as anyone here has for Labour, and most people don't actually talk in terms of left wing or right wing. A lot of people don't even talk in terms of government cuts. During the last general election debate, one of the most common terms Googled was, what is austerity? And that's a reality that you have to deal with. But what we do know is that people identify with a politics that stands for something, that speaks to their lives and gives them, I think, that mix of security but also hope, that they can get a better wage, they can live in a safe, affordable home, they can put their kids to a good school, and they'll be looked after when they're sick or old. Now is surely the time for that type of politics. Labour has that chance now to go beyond the terms that the Tories have set, to not only talk about a vision for a fairer society, but give people faith that a Labour government will help them build a better life for their family. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis, for that. And people who are coming to the austerity workshop straight after will hear Francis give a longer contribution, and there'll be plenty of opportunity for discussion and debate about how we can campaign around some of those issues in the East Midlands. Our next speaker is Chris Williamson. Chris was Labour MP for Derby North from 2010 to 2015. Now, when people tell you it doesn't matter how active you are on election days, remember this. Chris lost that election last May by 41 votes. That's the sort of margin of error that if we have more people out campaigning, if we have people more people out active, more people knocking on doors, more people chasing people up, results like that don't happen. So we're going to be working our best to work with Chris to see him back in Parliament as soon as possible. And Chris was a massive advocate of the Jeremy Corbyn for Leader campaign last summer, speaking at dozens of meetings around the country. So welcome, Chris.
Well, thanks very much indeed for that introduction, Steve. And as you can see, I've taken the Prime Minister's advice this morning and I've put on a proper suit and done up my tie. But my dad was an ardent Republican, and I'm an ardent Republican too, so I'm damned if I'm going to be singing the national anthem. So you forgive me if you forgive me on that one. But, you know, this is a significant day because 32 years ago today, the miners at Cortonwood Colliery walked out to start the year-long miner strike in order to defend the mining industry. We all know what happened a year later when the miners were defeated. And on that day, on the 3rd of March, the following year, I think in some ways hope faded. I wouldn't say hope died, but it certainly faded. It faded a bit more, I have to say, when I lost my seat and the Tories came to power in the election last year. But, you know, hope did make a huge comeback when Jeremy Corbyn won that leadership election by such an overwhelming majority on the 12th of September. And in some ways, it was worth the sacrifice for me to give the party and the movement the opportunity to elect a genuine socialist who I think will bring back people who have fallen out of love with the Labour Party. And one of the reasons I lost my seat in Derby North was not just because the opinion poll suggested we were going to win by a mile and people were a little bit complacent, but there were a lot of people who didn't bother to vote. 1,618 people voted for the Green Party in Derby North. Now, well over 41 of the people that voted Green have now actually joined the Labour Party and are now campaigning for the Labour Party. And I think what we should take strength from today is that momentum. And that brilliant video that Umar did, I mean, just sort of showed you what it's all about. The hope that actually poured out of that video. We are hope. Momentum. This meeting today represents hope in our nation. Hope for the movement. Hope to build a better society. Hope that we can make the economy work for everybody. People are sick to death of it only working for the top 0.1%. What's wrong with saying we want the economy to work for ordinary people? We want the people to be able to enjoy jobs which are reasonably well paid, where young people can go to university without being penalised for it. What's wrong with that? That's pretty moderate, it seems to me. Are we somehow seen as an extremist for not calling for that? And of course, we want decent public services. Public services define a decent society. So let's stand up for public services and argue for public services and actually make the point, not only do they define a decent society, but those public servants that work in the public sector, they're actually an engine for economic growth. Because everybody who works in the public sector spends their money in the real economy, don't they, sustaining jobs and services. And that's why it's so fantastic that we've got somebody in John McDonnell who actually understands that and wants the economy to work for ordinary people. And I think we can say as well today, and with Jeremy and John's team and the leadership of the Labour Party now, that we can look forward with hope to reversing the 40 years of neoliberal economics, which has totally failed the British people. It's led to an explosion in low pay. It's led to a massive housing crisis. Working class people, like I was in 1976, an apprentice bricklayer, I was able to aspire to buying a house and was able to buy a house of my own. Impossible in this day and age. What's wrong? We're saying we want people to be able to access a decent home of their own. That is absolutely just a fundamental human right, and I think we can look forward with the proposition that is coming forward to the hope that we can tackle the housing crisis, that we can actually get rid of privatisation in our public services and in our National Health Service, to reject austerity, because austerity has never worked anywhere in the world where it's ever been tried. We saw what happened in the 1930s, and the only way we actually managed to get full employment again was when we started preparing for war. Well, if we can get full employment to prepare for war, building arms to kill people, surely we can win the peace, can't we, and create full employment and decent jobs. And again, I think that's a fairly moderate ambition, I have to say. I don't think there's anything extremist about that. And also, the hope that we can create a green economy. And I was absolutely delighted, I don't know if people saw, but Jeremy's manifesto for the leadership, Protecting Our Planet, where we're talking about creating 1 million green jobs, eliminating fuel poverty, making sure that we can stop these energy companies from, I've got 1 minute left, from ripping off the consumers in our country, municipalising the energy market in the British Isles. That's absolutely a reasonable ambition, it seems to me, and to tackle the problems of air quality. And there are 40,000 people every single year die because of poor air quality. And one of the things which is in here is that Jeremy is committed to establishing an energy commission to oversee a different approach to the energy market and to create a green economy. So I say in conclusion, let's ignore the malcontents who are set on trying to destabilise the Labour Party. They are very, very small in number. Let's focus on solidarity in order to turn the hope that we have seen in that video, which is palpable in the people that have turned up today. Let's turn that hope into reality. Through solidarity, make a difference, ensure that we elect a Labour government at the next election with a proper socialist programme. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. And Chris will be leading a workshop on Europe after this session. And I noticed in the media a couple of days ago that they were trying to create a division, saying, oh, Momentum aren't talking about Europe and they're not backing the campaign. Well, we are backing the campaign. There is a debate today, and Chris and myself are socialists who are arguing for a socialist argument to stay in. Because I think we've got more in common, workers in this country, with Greek workers and Spanish workers and German workers and French workers than we've got with Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage any day of the week. Now, our next speaker is Christine Shawcroft. Now, Christine is a member of the Labour Party National Executive Committee and has been for many years. However, in previous years, let's say your opportunities to involve yourself in those meetings were somewhat limited. I think since September she's been a bit more vocal and a bit more active and catching the chair's eye a bit more. And I, for one, hope that Christine and the 5 people that are standing with her on the Grassroots Centre-Left Alliance slate are elected in big numbers in August this year. So, Christine, welcome.
Thanks very much, Steve. Can everybody hear me okay? Sorry, my voice is... I've had such a stinking cold the last couple of days. It's this is about the best I can do, really, but there we go. Yeah, I just wanted to say, basically, that the process that, the election on September the 12th was just the beginning of a process. It wasn't some kind of, happy accident or flash in the pan or whatever. The process that brought Jeremy to power is still going on. and that, you know, we still have new members joining. We still have people who maybe, you know, didn't support Jeremy in the original election are now coming over to join the party and get active. I don't know if you saw in the papers, the weekend papers a couple of weeks ago, Karen Danchuk was saying that she'd supported Liz Kendall. I mean, not even Andy Burnham, Liz Kendall in the election, and now she supports Jeremy Corbyn because he's honest. Liz, we're not turning any of you away. And she said she'd been very disappointed in Liz's campaign, you know. And I think Liz and Andy Burnham and Yvette Cooper were equally disappointed in their campaigns. But, you know, I feel a bit sorry for them, really, because those campaigns that they ran a few years ago could easily have won them the leadership. You know what I mean? It wasn't that there was anything wrong with their campaigns as such. It was the fact that what people are looking for in a politician now is just completely different. You know, they are fed up with the sound bites. They're fed up with the stage management. At the last conference, Chris Bryant said, you know, insincerity is the only thing that people can smell through a television screen. And, you know, I don't often find myself agreeing with him, but there we go, you know. I myself was featured in the Sunday Telegraph a few weeks ago. I'm one of these dangerous lefties that are on the Momentum steering group. I'm surprised that Steve and Chris and everybody are brave enough to be on the platform with me, actually. It's, you never know when I might suddenly go berserk and turn on them, you know. But after I was featured in the Telegraph, I actually got an email from a member of the public. So I'll have to put my specs on to read this. I did go to Nottingham University, but that was many decades ago. Yes, so I got, dear Miss Shawcroft. It's nice that people are polite, isn't it? You know. I read an article about you and some of your colleagues in today's Telegraph. Although I've always voted Conservative, I'm open to voting for any political party. At the next election, there's a good chance I might vote for Mr. Corbyn. So I won't read some of this. There's some disobliging remarks about some councillors in Waltham Forest, which I better... he's from Chingford. I've always voted Conservative, but at the last election I voted UKIP because I don't like Ian Duncan Smith. Well, you know... We've got something in common straight away, you see. Right, I'd like to... How can Mr Corbyn be in favour of remaining in the EU? The ordinary working person has had his working conditions cut because of the huge amount of immigrants that have come into the country. There is no argument that uncontrolled immigration has lowered the working man's weekly wage. I would be genuinely interested in hearing your point of view on this question. So I emailed him back and said... the terms and conditions of working people have not been cut by immigrants, they've been cut by bad employers. Jeremy has stated that what we need to do is stop agencies paying foreign workers less than the minimum wage, illegally, I might add, which undercuts the wages of local people. That is the problem, not immigration as such. I campaigned for equal pay for women for many years. We won the argument, although we're still waiting for the pay, when men realised that it was in their own interest to support it. The last thing any group of workers needs is the presence of another group which can undercut them. It is in the interests of British workers to support equal pay and union representation for all, migrants included, then we all benefit. Unscrupulous employers can't play one group off against another. And by the way, don't believe everything you read in the Telegraph. I then got an answer back, Dear Christine, you see, we're friends already. Many thanks for your reply. I agree with most of what you say. I actually think Mr Corbyn resonates with a lot of ordinary voters. He comes across as being genuine. How many politicians of other major parties can you say that about? I think he's got a lot better chance of being Prime Minister than people think. Best of luck, and once again, thank you. So, you know... This is an ex-Tory voter who voted UKIP at the last election when Labour nationally was panicking about UKIP and saying, oh, we've got to talk about immigration, let's talk about restricting numbers, let's talk about, British jobs for British workers and so on. If you confront the arguments and say, well, no, actually, this is not a problem, working class people have got more in common wherever they're from, and what we need to do is campaign together for all these things, then their arguments just collapse and they're with you. So this is what I think is our task in the days ahead and the months ahead. This is what Momentum's for, and this is what we should be going on to do. Thank you very much.
Christine will be running a workshop on Labour Party democracy and how we can improve it after this session, and I'm sure we'll all be going back to our constituencies to make sure that she and her colleagues are nominated for the NEC and that we will vote for her when it comes to the election in June and July and August. Before our next speaker, I just want to read a statement that I've been sent from Jeremy Corbyn, and it's as follows. We won a fantastic victory in the summer, and that was thanks to the grassroots movement that you built. Thank you very much. We have doubled the membership of the Labour Party, made our party a mass movement again, with more members than any other political parties combined. Our task now is to convince the country and to use our organisation to win more support in every community. Labour campaigning has already saved around 3 million families over £1,000 this April. By forcing George Osborne into backtracking on his tax credit cuts, we forced the government to abandon their prisons deal with Saudi Arabia, and just this week forced the government to back down on housing benefit cuts for elderly and disabled people in sheltered housing. Thank you to the organisers of this conference and to everybody who's come today. Together we have the power to make a fairer society and a better future for all. Best wishes, Jeremy Corbyn. Now, our final speaker needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. I've known John for many years through his work as the parliamentary coordinator for my own union, the PCS. He undertook this role, as he did for many unions, even though my union wasn't affiliated to the Labour Party. I can't think of one campaign that was run by my union in the last 15 years, whether it was against a Labour or a Conservative government, where we were defending our members' terms and conditions and jobs, that John has not backed us on, been on picket lines for, and fully supported our campaigns. He is truly a really good friend of the trade union movement. I honestly believe that the best appointment Jeremy Corbyn made in that first Shadow Cabinet was making John Shadow Chancellor. He's a socialist, and he's not afraid to say he's a socialist. John McDonnell.
Thanks for that. I think I've got this. Okay, thanks for that. Is this mic working all right? You know this story, I think, but I was at a meeting and I said, can you hear me at the back? And someone shouted out, unfortunately, yes. The bouncers sorted him. Some of you have heard this story, but let's recap. I want to give a report back of what's happened over the last, nearly 12 months now. It's 10 months, isn't it, since last May. And just to situate where we're at the moment, because this is extraordinary, isn't it? Did anyone ever think that I would be addressing you as the Shadow Chancellor before last May? Seriously. Sometimes I think I'm going to wake up. For me, it's a dream. For others, it's a bloody nightmare. Last May, exactly as Chris and Steve and others, Christine and Francis have said, last May, that Friday after the general election loss, we were absolutely despondent. I was still one of those ones thinking we'd be the largest party. And at that point in time, we'd had a number of meetings on the left to say if we were the largest party, that maybe when we go into government, we could negotiate with Ed Miliband, maybe to get a few junior ministerial appointments to the left and try and get a foothold back in the Labour Party administration again. Because for the last, I've been in Parliament now 19 years, so 97 I was elected, and the left were literally ripped away from holding any office whatsoever or any position. And then if they did secure a position, they didn't last very long during that period when they spoke up on a matter of principle. And you know how the system works. With Jeremy and I, Jeremy's been in 30 years. He had his 30th anniversary a year or so ago. I spoke at it and said, look, Jeremy's my closest friend in Parliament, and as my wife says, he's your only friend in Parliament. For 30 years, and for me for 18 years, they kept us off all committees. We couldn't serve on even a select committee. And there's that thing, when you vote against your own party, you know, the whips exercise goes on, they keep you off committees, they keep you off foreign delegations and all the rest of it. Some of you know this story. Dennis Canavan, an old mate of ours, worked with Dennis Skinner over the years. They kept him off everything for 20 years, and then he was retiring, going up to the Scottish Parliament to become an MSP. And they gave him a foreign delegation, and he was gobsmacked and came to see me, and Dennis said, look, they've given me a foreign delegation. I said, look, it's to Colombia, the highest political assassination rate in the world. You know, they have a sense of humour, but they kept us literally off everything. So we were hoping that we might be able to just get a foothold of junior ministerial positions or something like that to just get the left back into being in government again. I suppose our last Secretary of State ever got us this old Michael Meacher. And he did a good job and hung on as long as he possibly could, and then they got rid of him as well. So that was our position then. But that Friday we were pretty despondent. And as you know, I convened a number of meetings of the left platform, which would bring all the left organisations together. And Jeremy and I spoke at those meetings to say to the left, there was no chance of getting a left candidate on the ballot paper, so stop lobbying us and stop emailing us and stop phoning us, because there's no hope. Do not take racing tips off me. And we had two of those meetings, and we could not calculate up beyond, I said 23 or 24 nominations, we needed 35, and Jeremy, optimist that he is, said 25, 26, and that was it. But anyway, eventually, as you know, as a result of the pressure, we had a meeting in the Socialist Campaign Group, we went round the table, and literally it was like that. It was like that. There's so much pressure, we've got to run a candidate, even if it's only for the next week before nominations close, and then, well, at least we put the arguments for a week. So we needed a candidate. We went round the table. As you know, I said, I've done it twice. I couldn't even get on the ballot paper. There's no chance. And then Diane said, I've done it once and whatever. Don't want to do it again. And literally at the end of the table, there's Jeremy, and we said, it's your turn. And he said, oh, go on then. And that was it. Now, I say this time and time again, that's the sort of political leader I want. I tell you, in Parliament, Chris will tell you this, in Parliament there's so many of them that come in with that back of an envelope that says MP by certain age, Minister by certain age, Prime Minister by certain age. I want someone you have to force to take a position because they're so devoid of personal ambition. And that's what Jeremy is about, basically. I said I'd chair his campaign committee, and we set it up, and we then went to get the nominations, and we fought hard for those nominations. And I want to thank a lot of you here today who helped us on that, on the social media campaign of contacting Labour MPs and building a climate of opinion amongst MPs that they should nominate, if only for democracy's sake, to give us a voice. And in politics, you do deals, you know, I do deals. So I did a deal with a number of them. If we got to 34, they would nominate. And I did a deal with 5 of them that they would push us over the edge. We got to 11:30 before 12 o'clock midday when nominations closed. We were about 30, then we got to 33, 10 seconds to go, and I had 4 of them standing there with their nomination papers, 10 seconds to go, and I did this begging them in terms of democracy, tear-stained appeal for nomination. And 2 of them broke ranks, Andrew Smith and Gordon Marsden. I'll always be eternally grateful to them, and they pushed us over the edge to get to 35. We then had to go and find Jeremy, had gone for a cup of tea, to tell him he's the candidate. What then happened, some of you know this story, what then happened, I got the volunteer team together, which was fantastic, and I said, Jeremy's going to go out all around the country. All around the country. Yes, the formal hustings, but we're going to try and hit every city, every town we possibly can in the next few months. Start booking the halls. Jeremy said, come on, we'll do it together. I said, no, you know this story. I said, no, it'll be like Last of Summer Wine on tour. Just get out there, basically. And I said to the team, book halls no more than 100. Can I hold no more than 100? Make sure, it's the tradition of the left, make sure you can pull the seats away, so if only 20 turn up, it still looks packed. Something like that. We did the first ones. Now, the reason I say this story is because people should remember just, because I think that video showed it really well, and I'm grateful for that. It's a great piece of work. The first one we booked for 100, 500 people turned up. So we started booking halls for 500, 1,000 turned up. And it just went on like that, right the way around the country. It was a phenomenon we'd not seen before for a generation, most probably. And even I went through the 80s, I worked for the NUM, and GLC, and all the rate capping campaigns, etc. We had big meetings then, but actually the huge number of the meetings, we had 100 meetings around the country that Jeremy addressed. The stamina of the man is unbelievable, and all of them were on that sort of scale. And there's a great video of the Camden, the Bidborough Centre meeting, where he goes in, he addresses 2,000, we get the FBU fire engine, he addresses the people queuing up in the street outside for the FBU fire engine. Unbelievable. And there's a great film of two young people breaking into the hall to get into the meeting and not breaking out. When have you seen that before? It was unbelievable. Our canvassing team, some of you were involved in the regional canvass teams on the phones and all the rest of it, and they kept on reporting to me throughout the campaign on a weekly basis that we were getting something like 60% of the support on the canvass. And I turned time and time again, can't be real. And we had to retrain people again to test that the canvassing was being done properly. And all the way through, and then we got to that last week, and the final returns I got on the Thursday before the Saturday was 60%. We went into that QE2 hall, we went into the green room to be briefed, Jeremy and I, and then they came up with all the other candidates. And I have to say this, it was an emotional time for everybody. But all through that campaign, you know, all the candidates hung together pretty well. They treated each other with respect and comradeship, and I'll be eternally grateful for all of them for doing that as well. Liz Kendall, Andy Burnham, all the way through they held themselves at stake. When they came in with the results, I had our canvass return 60%. When they came with the results, you know the result, 59.5%. I told our canvassers, you've got it wrong again. But what was great about it is that we won a majority amongst the members, the affiliated supporters, and the other supporters that came in. So we won a majority amongst every group within the party itself. There could be because there were some people arguing, well, he'll get the new £3 supporters majority, that'll get the win for him, he won't get the support amongst the traditional members. Yes, he did. He won each one. And I tell you what I was really proud of. The first act of Jeremy Corbyn did, the first political act, apart from speaking and thanking people for being elected, etc., at that conference, and then go and thank the volunteers. The first act is that he joined the March for Refugees. Now, that symbolised... For me, it symbolised what we're all about, basically, this movement. Standing up for possibly the most vulnerable group within society. Despite everything the media throws against them, we stood solidly with them. All through the campaign, it's interesting that we need to be aware of what that campaign was all about. And I think Franz hit the nail on the head, basically. It was about people who were living their lives and then sharing their experiences. Because, yes, we had rallies, but people were engaging in those rallies, coming to them, explaining what was happening to them in their lives and how change was required. And what Jeremy's campaign was all about was about hope, giving people hope. That by not hope in an individual leader, but hope that we could build a movement to address those issues that people raised in those meetings. And it was absolutely pragmatic and concrete what we discussed, and most of you were there. People are coming along. People are coming along and saying we've got a housing crisis, can't afford a roof over our heads. I tell you, in my constituency tonight, I represent a working class multicultural constituency on the west of London, and I've lived there nearly 40 years. And tonight, there'll be 200 families in bed and breakfast, homeless. I've got people who are sleeping in sheds. We have a system in our community, in our local area, where they rent garages and sheds out, sheds at the bottom of gardens that family now live in, and they pay rent. The average rent in my constituency now is between £1,200 and £1,600 a month. We've reinvented the back-to-back. They now rent the front of a house and the back of a house to different families. This is in the 5th richest country in the world, and I don't even mention the elements of that are sleeping along the canal, in our parks, homeless, and there's been a 30% increase in homeless over the last period under this government. So people were raising that issue about housing, how scandalous it was. I point that Chris made, you can work all hours God send at the moment and still not be able to afford a roof over your house. In my constituency, I don't know what it's like here, we've got relatively good employment because I've got the airport, not bad wages to be frank, but actually what the housing costs are so high that people work, families, mums and dads work different shifts, they pass in the night. Children never see their parents together because of the nature of the work that they have to do. And it has consequences. We've got a scandal of buy-to-let landlords letting out properties that are overcrowded. So no wonder when the kids come home for school, they're out on the streets because there's nowhere at home to sit, do your homework, eat round a table as a family. And when they're out on the streets, what do they become? They become prey to the gangs. So you can see how society can break down in that way, just because of that one failure of policy. And I have to say it's a failure of policy over decades. And it was under New Labour as well, I'm afraid. And the solution is bloody simple, isn't it? You build council houses. You just build them. You halt the sell-offs. You build the homes. And you do it on a scale that actually we've not seen before I think for about 50 years. I can remember, I came into politics as a kid in the 1960s. And I can remember Harold Wilson's administration. I can remember him being condemned for not building 500,000 homes a year and just missing those targets. We can do it because we've got the resources to do it. Those resources are locked up largely in private companies not willing to invest, to be frank. And I don't know whether you saw it over last week, the independent newspaper inquiry into house building, where Taylor Woodrow and a number of companies they've now alleged are actually combining together to refuse to build to make sure they maintain the price increases on properties that they can then sell. That's a cartel and a monopoly that's taking place that is actually resulting in families being out on the streets. I think that's criminal, to be frank. Absolutely criminal. And if they're not willing to build on the land, to be frank, I think local authorities should have the right to take that land over and start building council houses again. What was interesting, I'll just throw some of the policy areas that came up in that campaign, because what was interesting as well is a lot of young people saying, fine, but it's going to take a while before we can build on that scale. We can have the potential to either rent an affordable rent or even the potential to buy a property. So what happens in the meantime, because we have to rent? Well, to be frank, in a number of areas in our country now, particularly the larger cities, rents now so outstrip the ability of people to afford them and live or have any decent quality of life. The view that came up from the floor time and time again is we used to have in this system a system of fair rents. So if we can't build fast enough, and we need that interregnum where people are still privately letting, to be frank, rent controls is the solution. And it's interesting that that debate now is happening in the mayoral campaign in London itself. And Sadiq Khan is now raising the issue around fair rents and how do we arrive at them, what the nature of those controls. Should they be linked in some areas in particular to people's average wages? Those sorts of issues will come up. So housing was a big issue for us overall. Can I say also on empty properties? It was interesting because what the figures that came out, 700,000 empty properties in this country, 300,000 of them empty for more than 6 months. I think it's a crime that a property is empty while you've got a homeless family. So the solution is give the councils powers to take over those empty properties and house the homeless families in them, because we're in a crisis situation in many areas. Those sorts of issues came up. We had lots of young people join the campaign. Actually, we had people of all ages. It was cross-generational, like today. But we had lots of young people turn up at those, lots of students. And the issue for us then was, they were saying, how do we survive? If you're a young worker, why are we discriminated against on the minimum wage? We get paid less of a minimum wage, even in most instances when we're doing the same work. So why can't we eliminate the discrimination against young workers in that way? The other issue, obviously, was students coming up and explaining to us time and time again the sort of levels of debt that they were going to be faced with once they left university. And to be frank, Jeremy and I voted against tuition fees. So we've got a moral commitment, I think, to scrap tuition fees once and for all. It's on the simple premise that we've always adhered to, that education is a gift from one generation, not a commodity to be bought and sold or made profits out of. With regard to health, Steve has mentioned it with regard to the junior doctors, who we give 100% support to. But with regard to health, time and time again, we were getting health workers turning up who are explaining the sort of stresses and pressures that they were under as a result of the under-resourcing of the NHS, but also as a result of some of the decisions that have been made in the past as well. PFI was a disaster on a scale that crippled some of our sectors, both in terms of transport and also in health. On the tube, when they brought the PPP forward, we opposed that and voted against it at every time under New Labour, and we were chastised for it and abused for it, etc., during that period. Absolutely isolated virtually in Parliament. That had to be bought out. £3 billion contract had to be bought out. We discovered afterwards 400 million was spent on lawyers and consultants during that process. It was a scandal. It was a rip-off. In terms of the PFIs with regard to the hospital services, as you know, there's some scandalous PFIs right the way around the country. The worst one we discovered was the Norfolk and Norwich one in Norwich. So the profit rates there were beyond the wildest dreams of some of the speculators. Now, we're landed with them at the moment, and some of them have all pushed health trusts into near bankruptcy at times over the years. And what we've said time and time again, when we go back into government, let's make it absolutely clear, no more PFIs, no more of these deals with the private sector where we get fleeced. But also, it may well be right that some of those PFIs that are long-standing, it might well be cheaper, to be frank, to buy them out now and bring them back into straightforward public ownership and control, so that we never go down that route again. And the simple solution on all of this was to be, in terms of the NHS, it was straightforward. No more privatisation of the NHS. Stop this backdoor privatisation that's going on, that went under New Labour and is going on the Tories themselves. And let's look now at how we properly democratise the NHS, both in terms of the involvement of local communities, the patients, and the workforce themselves. And in that way, the NHS truly will be safe in people's hands, because it will be our people that will be running it in the future. All of those policy areas were examples of where people raised issues with us, and we responded on the basis of a dialogue and about what are the pragmatic ways of tackling the problems themselves. They're looking at a Labour Party that they wanted back again, to be honest. They wanted a Labour Party, not New Labour, not Old Labour, they wanted a Labour Party. And on all of those, they wanted to repeat the aspirations almost of the founding fathers and mothers of our movement itself. And one of the key aspects of that is the Labour Party, from its foundation, has always been a party of peace. So what came out of that is no more military adventures, no more support for wars in the Middle East or anywhere else that's destroying lives. But also, this very strong view, and people need to recognise that the mandate that Jeremy got on this, because it was pivotal in his campaign, the strong view that this should not be a country that renews Trident missiles and Philippines. We're now consulting on that. It will be part of our policy development, and it's up to all of us to mobilise to win that argument within the party. But to make sure that all those who are involved in that industry, in that sector at the moment, are given the security of long-term stable employment as we diversify our economy, because we've got to protect that workforce just as much as we want to protect the whole of our community. Finally, let me just say that those are the sort of policies that Jeremy was elected on. Those are the sort of policies now that we're trying to drive through the Labour Party in its policy development process itself. Jeremy constructed a shadow cabinet on the basis of left, right and centre in the traditional way of any past Labour Prime Minister, bar Blair or Brown. Because, to be frank, you get better policy making that way. You don't want just a group of zombies who, when you pull the lever, they just put up their hands all the time. You want people who will dispute with you, argue with you. That's democracy, because you get better decisions that way, to be frank. And that's how it's worked in the past. Now, it might be rumbustious. It might well be rumbustious, but don't mistake democracy for division. And respect dissent as well. Now, in the Parliamentary Labour Party, since then, we've set up a shadow cabinet. There was a few problems, and Jeremy did the reshuffle because we had a real problem with a particular individual. And what happened, we got criticised for that reshuffle. The reason it took so long is because actually Jeremy is probably the most caring and considerate person I've met in politics, and he wanted to talk it through with people. And we weren't going to dance to the tune of the media. So we did the reshuffle. Within the Parliamentary Labour Party, the vast bulk of them just want to get on with the job. They want to be opposing the Tories and campaigning for a better future. We've got a small, tiny minority that just haven't come to terms with Jeremy's leadership yet. They feel, I understand it, they feel dispossessed. I understand it. I understand. I've been on the back benches for 18 years. You know, I understand that. And we're trying to reassure them they have a role within the Labour Party. They have a really good role to play. We might not agree on everything, but on the bulk of our, I think, values, etc., the way forward, we can do. So work with us. Come back on board. Don't after every PLP meeting go out in that corridor and brief against us, because when you do that, you're not undermining us. You're undermining every council candidate that's on the doorstep canvassing at the moment, and everyone else, the PCCs and every other by-election. So our appeal is not for everyone to march, you know, hands up all at the same time, agree on everything or anything like that. It's not for some form of Stalinist centralism. Quite the reverse. Our appeal is just to be comradely. Involve yourself in the democratic process. If you've got an issue that you disagree with, work it out within the party's democratic structures. We won't win every vote. No one will win everything. But we'll compromise. We'll come together around our basic values. And we'll unite in that way. Because what we want is a united movement. People don't vote for divided parties. They will walk away if they see us split all the time. So we're saying to everyone now, there's responsibilities on all our shoulders about how we behave. The responsibility first is we've got to get rid of these Tories, as Francis and others have outlined, are destroying our society, dismantling our welfare state. This is a scorched earth policy under these Tories before they go out of power to destroy everything that we've built up to lay the foundations of a civilised society. So the onus is upon us, first of all, to oppose and get rid of these Tories. But then secondly, the onus is upon us is to give people that hope of a future based upon what? Social justice, equality, democracy. We call it socialism. I think that's what inspired people to vote for Jeremy to become leader of the party. And if we can unite around those principles and work together, I think it will be those very basic principles and values that will inspire people to elect Jeremy to become the next Prime Minister of this country. Thanks a lot. Further questions?
Thank you, John. we are really pushed for time because John is the sort of person that will go to an event, and this is the first of 3 events today for John. He's going back to London to do another conference this afternoon and then a constituency event this evening. So I've literally got time for 1 or 2 questions, and these are questions, not massive statements. So 1 or 2 questions, because there will be plenty of other time for debate later in the day. Okay. I'll take that person there.
I think I'm right in saying that before Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party, you and he were both one of the handful of MPs who were supporting the NHS reinstatement that was written by Alison Pollock and Peter Broderick. It's not clear to me now that you and Jeremy Corbyn are supporting that bill so firmly. And what you said about the NHS now, you just said no further privatisation. You didn't say anything about rolling back the huge amounts of existing privatisation. So where do you stand, please?
Yeah. Okay. I'll bring John back in. So I've got one more. I've got me. Yeah.
I'm just wondering with these new changes in the Labour policy, whether or not we'll be formulating a new policy on pensions at this year's Labour Party conference, because that's the next thing that the Tories are going to be attacking, our pensions. And indeed, they've already attacked the mine workers' pension, and that's what they want, 750 million out of our pensions. So we've got our pensions slashed and off. I'd just like to ask John about getting together and formulating some kind of response to the Tory attack on our pensions.
Okay, I'm going to bring John back in. I just also say, I mean, John talked about previous leadership elections. In 2007, there was a coronation of Gordon Brown following Tony Blair, and there was an attempt at that point to open up nominations, and John was trying to get nominations as the left candidate at that time. And I remember the manoeuvrings that went off to stop John getting those, whatever it was at the time, 56 nominations, I think, at that point you had to get. I just ask people just to think about for a second what difference there might have been in the last 8 years if a leadership election had taken place at that time.
Well, to be frank, I think we'd be in government. And I don't say it as a personal boast. I just think if we'd have adopted the policies we argued for, we would have been in government. Because at the last election, I had a lot of time for Ed Miliband. In fact, I didn't want him to stand down straight away. I wanted him to stay around until we'd sorted ourselves out. And I had a lot of time for him, and I think he moved things on. But at the last election, the problem was people really couldn't distinguish an awful lot between us because this austerity-light policy and because this whole range of mixed messages. And the point that this comrade has made here, let me make it clear. Jeremy and I supported that legislation, and we still do, and we'll be arguing for it to support within the Labour Party for it and within the Shadow Cabinet when it comes up following Friday, I think it is. And the issue there, the reason we supported it, is because it isn't just that we want to halt the privatisation of the NHS, we want to roll back from the privatisations that have taken place. Because you've seen what the pressures that the NHS is under at the moment, and part of that is because value is being extrapolated from the NHS as a result of these private contracts. And if we're going to budget effectively for the future of the NHS, we've got to make sure that all the resources that we put into it are actually going directly to patient care rather than to the profits to private contractors. And I have to say also that some of the transfer of control, etc., to GPs in terms of local groups as well has resulted in further privatisation too. The chair of my CCG actually was a group of doctors who set up a Harmony project that was an out-of-hours service, a group of doctors coming together. They sold it onto a venture capitalist organisation. They made £2 million each. Now, again, what's a venture capitalist organisation interested in the NHS for apart from profits? So again, we've got to try and roll back all the damage that has been made. With regard to pensions, Owen Smith is leading on that. I think he's extremely bright. He's on the left. There'll be consultations that go through our normal policy process, but we want to try and broaden that out as widely as we possibly can. My view is that the best form of pension security is a state pension at a level that enables people to live the same sort of life as though they were in work, so better connection between that and what their wages were and the average wage as well. And if you look at what's happened right the way across Europe, our pensions have been undermined in relation to what the average wage is, and it has always been disproportionate in the last 3 decades. So it's that sort of approach we're taking. In terms of with individual pension schemes, I used to be deputy head of the NUM Social Insurance Department dealing with the miners' pension scheme over the years, and to be frank, it's a scandal that if there's people have invested in it, they've invested their savings in terms of their work life, their earned income that's gone into the pension scheme, and to be frank, I think you're right, they've been ripped off over the years. That could have been the best pension as an example of every industrial sector, and it's been milked by government to subsidise the government itself. We've been raising that in Parliament, and we've been doing it both in terms of me as an individual MP, but also through the old NUM group, and we'll be looking to redress some of the outrageous acts that have been taken by past governments on the MPS when we go back into government.
Thanks, John. I know there's lots and lots of people who would like to ask further questions, but John has got a train to get back to London, and we've got a packed agenda with workshops. And to be fair to all the people who have put the effort into preparing those workshops, I don't think it's fair to extend this, risk John missing his train and putting all the workshops and everything else back for the rest of the day. I know John will, at some point, come back to Nottingham and do an evening of a question and answer evening, I'm sure, where we can do a full night with John. So I want to thank him again for his contribution today. I need to make a couple of very quick announcements before we move on.